Well, welcome to our podcast today. My name's Dr Beth Mosley. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work with children, young people and families, largely in school settings. And I've been working in that area for the last 15 years. So it's a really passionate part of my life.
And hi, my name is Dr Tamara Scully and I'm also a clinical psychologist. And I joined the school project just over a year ago. And prior to that, all my experience has been working in child and adolescent mental health. And it's a real privilege to be here today.
So we've decided, we've put together a podcast today, our first ever podcast. So hopefully it will be okay. Really helping, sharing really our experiences as not just professionals, but also as parents during this COVID-19 time, and thinking about some of the things that we might have needed help on over the last 8 weeks, but also we need some advice and support on going forward as parents of children, especially when we think about some young people going back to school at the moment and the levels of anxiety that might be creating in households. So that's what we plan to talk about today.
And I think, we want to start off by just, acknowledging just how difficult things are at the moment for everyone. And we know that kind of as parents or carers, we are providing a lot of care and support for our young people. And sometimes this can be really challenging. And I guess what we know is that when we take the time to look after ourselves, it then becomes much easier to look after other people. Sometimes this can feel really tricky, and I know that for some of us it almost feels counterintuitive, and it tends to be the thing that goes to the bottom of our list. But actually looking after ourselves is incredibly important.
I mean, that's something I find quite difficult in normal life before COVID, because with all my working, being a single parent, having 3 children, one's 15, one's 10 and one's 7, and kind of like just all the demands of that we all face in our daily lives, I think often I put myself last. And I think definitely in this crisis, that's been a theme for me at the beginning, that you're so quickly moving into managing the crisis and looking after everyone else, you end up forgetting about yourself. But the problem is then I just found myself getting so easily stressed out, and then my children getting really upset because they're looking to me to guide them on how they should be feeling about life at the moment with so many changes going on. And I just found the simplest of thing worked. I've got a dog. I'm lucky I live in the countryside at this time, so I can easily walk him. And just walking the dog every morning and every night just seemed to be the thing that helped me get things in perspective, just that downtime away from it all and just building into a daily routine. It's the most important part of my day in so many ways. It's where I feel like I can really recover and recuperate or prepare for the day or process the day, because during the day I am working all day plus trying to homeschool my kids, and it's a really difficult task. So I can see how hard it is to actually do it.
It's a lot, isn't it? And I think probably the key is not to overcomplicate it. Even doing some really small things for yourself, like making sure you have time to talk to a good friend, or I don't know, watch a nice movie, all of those things will kind of contribute to your well-being. And I think, like you were saying, Beth, when you feel stressed, the whole house can feel a bit stressed. And I think that's really true. I think like psychologists sometimes call that emotional contagion. How we can kind of catch the stress of other people. And I think that's probably the other reason why it's important that we kind of put it at the top of our list, because we're kind of setting the emotional tone in our houses.
Yes, like I'm feeling quite stressed right now because my daughter's in the kitchen baking cookies and I can smell burning, and I think she's going to be so upset. she burns this batch of cookies, but I'm not going to do anything about it. And I think that's the other thing. It's about expectations, because at the beginning of this, I felt like I've got to have the same level of productivity at work. I've got to be able to teach my kids as if they're at school and meet all of their different needs. And I've still got to be able to manage my house and keep on top of everything. And I quickly worked out that if I was going to have those normal expectations for myself and for the young people in my family, this whole thing was just going to fall apart really quickly. And so I have had to really change what I see as an achievement at the end throughout the day. And I'm going to let my daughter burn the cookies, which I probably wouldn't have done before, because I recognise actually in the great scheme of things, it's not the most important thing. Most important thing is probably just the climate in my household and how everybody's feeling about this new world we're living in. So yeah, I guess that's something I really noticed.
And it's, I think probably the term that's being bandied around a lot at the moment is, you must have routine and structure in your day. And it is, where possible, and it's definitely not always possible, it is helpful to try and maintain some sort of a routine. I think all of us kind of get feelings of safety and security when we have some sort of structure and predictability. But I think what's also really important, and I think you're just making this point, Beth, is, we're all different, and what works for one family is not going to work for another family. And for all families, I think it's just thinking about, okay, what are the things that are really important to me? Is it really important to me that we all eat our meals together? And if that's the thing that's really important to you, then that's what gets prioritized. And it's okay to let some of the other stuff slide.
And I mean, that there's nothing more for me that's been a worry as sleep, because my kids are naturally lie in, which is, I know for lots of people, is the opposite problem they might have with their children, being early risers. But it means that my kids quite like going to bed late. So I feel like we've just gone into this weird summer holiday zone where my kids are going to bed really late, but they're getting up really late. And my 15-year-old, oh my goodness, it's impossible to get him out of bed and conscious before midday, really. And there's this enormous pressure of all that work that's stacking up. And then, of course, at the other end of the day, he's just wide awake and wanting to spend the majority of his time gaming. And as a parent, I really don't know how. It was so much easier when you had that structure of school and nobody questioned it. But now my 15-year-old just doesn't really feel that there's any priority to get up, because anything he can do at 9 a.m. he could easily do at 1 p.m. So it's really tough to actually know, what do I fight my children over and what do I let go, especially when you're thinking about people going back to normal life. This isn't going to be the way it's going to be forever. At some point he's going to have to start getting back up for school at a normal time. So I've been finding that quite tough.
And what's tricky, I suppose, about that is that in some ways he's right. Nothing is going to be happening at 9 o'clock for him that he isn't able to do at some later point in the day. So that's tricky as a parent, I think. But I think it's also just thinking about, there's a lot of conversations going on at the moment, I think, about screen time and the amount of time kind of adolescents in particular are kind of spending on screens. And I think what's really helpful and what has helped quite a lot of parents is kind of thinking about this in the context of teenage development. Like at the moment, we know that it is crucially important for them to be connected in with their peers. And this is a real function of adolescence. So, I think the mental health community in general is kind of advocating allowing our teenagers to spend more time on screens, to connect with their friends through online gaming, because we recognize that this is so crucial to their brain development. Now, I get what you're saying, Beth, and I think that there can be a real knock-on impact on sleep around this, and I know this is something that we're hoping to do a podcast on at a later date, but we do know that when any of us are deprived of sleep on an ongoing basis, that can kind of create quite a downward spiral in our mental health. So I guess it is just being mindful of that while also recognizing that connection is really important.
And I guess that's where I've had to step in as a parent, because I was trusting him to come offline by midnight and he wasn't. And I'd wake up at 1 a.m. This is the problem when you want to go to sleep before your older children do. So in the end, I had to take the router, the power cable away. And that does seem to have really helped. Just impose something that we can't argue about. It's just done now, and that's stopping me having to expect him to do something that he's probably not developmentally quite ready for, which is, you know, when he's fully in with his friends, say, I've got to go because my mum told me to go to bed at midnight. So I can see how the importance of friendship, because that's the challenge as a parent of a teenager, is I feel like he's more isolated because he's in his bedroom so much. And at least when he was at school, he was out and about and doing things. But I guess he's not in his bedroom on his own. He is with his peer group. But I do worry about that. I do worry about him becoming more and more isolated. So it's reassuring that gaming isn't going to be doing something negative necessarily, if I can manage making sure he does get some sleep in the night time.
And actually,
sorry,
it's okay. I was just going to say, actually, by you kind of putting that boundary into place, Beth, and kind of taking the router, you know, I think that's a really important point. You're kind of giving him, helping him to be able to switch off from it. And actually, I think you're doing I think any of us are doing a real service to our young people by doing that, because sometimes it's just so hard to say to your peers, okay, I'm leaving now, you know, for that kind of fear of missing out. So those boundaries, I think, can be really helpful.
What about my 7-year-old? I mean, I think it's much harder for him. My 10-year-old and my 15-year-old know how to kind of connect with their friends and stay connected with their friends. But for my 7-year-old, I think he's really missing his classmates. And like, we've done a few class Zoom lessons, but it's just not the same as just playing, because they play when they're 7, don't they? And he's greatly into football and he's missing out. And I can really see he's losing a lot of his enthusiasm for life. And I just wonder how can I communicate with him around whether he is struggling or not, because I think he finds it really difficult to just volunteer that information, really.
Yeah, and I think with younger ones it can be really tricky. I suppose one of the things I think is really important for all of us to remember, regardless of our children's age, is anxiety doesn't always look like anxiety. It can often look like something really different. And I suppose what we often look out for are kind of changes in behavior. So, if you have a little person who used to really enjoy doing something, and then suddenly they have no interest in doing it anymore, or there might be kind of changes in their sleeping or changes in their eating. And actually parents are really well placed to kind of notice those changes. And I guess the other thing that you often see in younger children is lots of kind of what if questions. So, what if I go back to school, nobody wants to talk to me anymore? Or what if I go back to school and someone has taken my space where I normally sit at lunchtime? Or what if something happens to you when you're going back to work? Questions to parents. So just questions around, just lots of what if questions around what's going on. And I guess, really the best thing that we can do as parents is just be curious, just to try and think about what might be behind some of these behaviors, and getting alongside them, and maybe just wondering aloud about the kinds of things that you think might be kind of the kinds of things you think your child might be struggling with. So, I suppose an example might be, I noticed you didn't eat your dinner tonight, and I just wondered if you were struggling with the idea of not seeing your friends for your birthday. Now, sometimes you will get it right, and that's great. Sometimes you will get it so wrong. But I guess whether you get it right or wrong, you're really giving your young person a clear message of, I notice that you're struggling at the moment and I'm here. And that's helpful.
It's really interesting you say that, because my 7-year-old wouldn't eat his dinner the other night, took himself up to bed, which is so unlike him. And when I kind of asked him what was wrong, he couldn't really tell me. But what I did was I played Lego alongside him. He's still massively into Lego. And it was whilst we were playing Lego without me asking him that he actually then started to just talk out loud about some of the things he was worried about. And at that point, I could then do a bit more of that wondering out loud without him being under pressure to tell me what's wrong. Because I don't think he really knew what was wrong, and it was difficult for him to put that into words. And so yeah, I can see how difficult that can be as a parent when you're feeling stressed to take that time out to do that. But then it really made a massive difference to him and how he was feeling after that, playing with him and Lego and talking about it, because then he seemed to relax, and he then went and had something to eat, and I felt like, oh great, he's feeling much better. Because I think we often forget how much our children being unhappy or worrying about how our children are feeling and why can often make us feel really unsettled as parents, and just not be able to kind of go to sleep that night thinking that you've not got so much to worry about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And interestingly, just thinking about your Lego example, I guess what a lot of parents of teenagers will say is that it's often in the car or on a walk that they kind of have their most kind of in-depth, I guess, conversations with their teenagers. And I think there's just something about that act of doing something alongside someone else that just makes those conversations a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's so true, because I've got my 15-year-old doing more cooking dinner, and he cooks the dinner sort of every other night now. And I find if I potter around in the kitchen while he's doing that, he ends up chatting to me about the stuff that's going on for him. And it's great because I get a little bit of a window into his world. And most of the time it's fine, but if there's anything he's worried about, that's the time it's probably going to come up. So yeah, I can really see how not asking directly, but being available. So the pottering around is me sort of being available if there is anything going to come up, but me not pushing him into kind of talking, because I do find the more you push with teenagers, the harder you get that kind of non-response, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess my 10-year-old daughter's different personality altogether, and she's going back to school tomorrow. She's year 6, and she just won't stop asking me questions that actually I can't answer. And I think, this crisis has given me the first time in my life where I really feel completely stuck with so many answers to questions that my children might be asking me. And how do I handle that, really?
I mean, I think it's a tricky one, because I think there are just loads of things that nobody knows at the moment. And, I think probably the most important thing is to be honest about the uncertainty and be honest about not having all of the answers. I think for our young people and for ourselves, the whole way through our lives, we're going to have times when we don't have all the answers and when we're uncertain about things. And actually, it's an incredibly important skill to develop, to be able to just sit with uncertainty. So it's, in some ways, it's an opportunity, I guess, for our young people to be able to just sit with that uncertainty and recognize that actually this might feel a bit uncomfortable, but it's okay. But I guess alongside that uncertainty, I suppose it's also important to just think about the things that you are able to have some agency over, or you are able to have some control over. So I think, kids have really benefited from kind of recognizing that even though there's lots of things they can't do in this pandemic, there are things they're able to do, like they can stay at home and they can wash their hands regularly. And when they're out, they can make sure that they're staying kind of 2 meters away from other people. And I think with most schools, I think what they're trying to do is that they're trying to create new rules and new expectations around how they expect students to behave. And, I think that will be helpful because it gives a tiny bit of structure and certainty in a very uncertain time.
Yeah, and I guess my kind of sense of trusting the school is so important right now, because if I trust the school, or even if I have some small doubts, I almost need to not convey the doubts, but rather impart the trust to my daughter so that she can feel like when she's in that new environment, she can trust the adults and the advice and guidance they're going to be giving and how they're going to be looking after the students. So I guess it's a message about living with the uncertainty, not having all the answers, and that's okay. And I guess we're handing over that responsibility to some other adults, which is really difficult for us as parents, because I think one of the things we've been able to do for this crisis is keep our family, for a lot of us, we've been able to keep our family in one place and feel like we can control the exposure to the virus. And I guess this returning to school for some children who haven't been at school, that's going to feel a big step as a parent, because we're now handing that trust to other adults. And I guess I really need my daughter to trust those teachers so she can follow the guidelines they're going to set, so she can believe in them, and that can help her feel safe. So I've definitely been trying to do that with my conversations with her. But one of the things I notice is trying to move her away from her feelings about it. Like, she thinks it's so unfair because her brothers aren't going back to school. And instead of me kind of saying, yeah, it's unfair, I'm just saying, oh, come on, just get over it. I need you back at school. and I think that's probably more frustrating than anything, that I'm probably not acknowledging just how anxious my daughter might be, or how unfair it might be, and how that makes her feel angry. Because in a way, I just want her to get on with it. And somehow I feel like if I start dwelling on the feelings, we might end up digging a hole for ourselves. So I don't know what your advice would be around that, really.
And well, I'm smiling, I guess, because I think a lot of parents have this anxiety, me included, about, oh gosh, if I really start giving this time and attention, it's just going to turn into something even bigger. But actually, I think when children are in a situation like this, when they're kind of feeling really anxious about things, I think it's really important that we are able to recognize that what they're experiencing is really valid for them. And I think without doing this, I think what a young person is kind of left with is the feeling that the person that they've turned to for support just doesn't get it. So even though it can feel incredibly frustrating, I think it can be really helpful if you can just take the time to listen to them, and maybe try, I don't know, something like, it's a big thing going back to school after such a long unexpected break, and it's okay to be feeling worried about it. It's normal to be feeling worried about it. And I think when you're able to do that, so when you're able to kind of validate what they're experiencing, what you'll notice is that they're really able to calm down their emotional regulation system, and then they themselves are then able to start thinking a little bit more clearly. So even though I get that it's really hard to do it, I think the more we can do that validation, the better, really.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better, really, and gives me some ideas going forward, because I think the next few weeks are going to be really challenging as my daughter is back in school and coming home with her reports of what the day's been like, and managing that in the evenings and the night before. I think actually for a period of time, as she adjusts, it might be quite tricky for a while, and I can imagine her wanting to vote with her feet and maybe refuse to go to school. So that's going to take a lot of strength from me to use some of these things we've talked about to make sure that the next couple of weeks is not going to be as stressful as it could be, if that makes sense. So really just thinking about what we talked about today, the key things are: look after yourself as the parent, as the adult, and do that in simple ways that are accessible to you, that you can pretty much fit into your life in a daily basis. Make sure that you have some kind of routine in your household, but around the things that are important to you as a family, and maybe reduce expectations so that you're not putting too much pressure on yourselves and those ones in your family, which are going to make life feel more difficult at this time. I guess being curious about what might be going on for young people, no matter what age they are, not making assumptions about what that might be, and creating the space through shared activities to maybe talk about thoughts and feelings. Encouraging relationships with friends for young people so that they've got that contact, even if it involves more time gaming or on screens than you would otherwise like as a parent. And I guess just acknowledging that this is a difficult time for all of us, and through this we are maybe learning some really positive things about how adaptable we are. I mean, it's amazing now you go to the supermarket and you just accept the fact that you've got a queue behind the lines that have been set out. It's almost like you just don't question it now. So how quickly we adapt as human beings, and particularly children, would suggest that actually probably our children will, majority of the time, quite quickly take on board the new rules and regulations at school, and actually maybe they're a little bit more robust than sometimes we believe they might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that last point that you've made is incredibly important. I think we really need to hold on to the fact that our kids are adaptable and they're resilient, and, you know, for the most part, they're going to come through this and come out the other side a little bit stronger.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Tamara. Hope this has been helpful for people who are listening, and we'll welcome any feedback or suggestions for further topics.
Lovely. Thank you.
Bye then.